And we're back in the car on a Sunday like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Sunday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, yesterday was a kind of a history and memory-based episode, and today will also be in that ballpark. I guess giving a little bit more information about myself, my sort of trials and tribulations as a younger person. How did I end up a podcaster? How did I end up going to film school when my dad was an accountant and my grandfather on one side was a mobster and on the other side was a machinist who built airplane parts by hand and then ended up in the bowling alley and nightclub business. So I got a lot of colorful people in my family. And here I am with a podcast, and I worked, as many of you already know, on the outer edges of the movie business as a writer for more than 2 decades. And I have had a lot of ups and downs, particularly when I was a much younger person. And the story of my high school graduation, which I told yesterday, that was the year of 1992, was the single probably worst year of my life. Well, not that far behind is the year before, 1991. But I had a couple of more positive things that occurred in 91, and I kind of touched on this yesterday. But one thing that almost everybody agrees on is that there are certain advantages to being an adult, even though you have adult responsibilities. And when you make a mistake as a kid, usually, or at least my experience, there was an adult to kind of pick up the mess or bail you out of a jam, sometimes literally, but just as often symbolically and metaphorically. But at least you have some level of control over your life. When you are a kid, even into your later teens, sometimes you're at the absolute mercy of mom, of dad, of some parental authority figure. Well, 34 years ago today, on June 29th, 1991, I did something that I did not want to do. Spoiler alert, I didn't want to do, but I didn't have a choice because I was 17 years old. And as much as my mom and I were somewhat on decent terms, the story from yesterday, we were at loggerheads to a far greater extent. But us being on good terms doesn't mean when she says, Jay, I bought tickets for us to travel via Amtrak to Fort Lauderdale. I said no. I said no. I stood on my head for a week. I'm not going. This isn't fair. I did not have autonomy to make that decision. I wanted to know why we weren't flying. What the fuck? Hey, bro, there's not unlimited funds. My mom, one of her great quotes ever. She says, well, I'm getting this. I'm paying for this. Well, no, you're not. You're kind of not really. We know why you're not. You're getting, okay. But we're not getting airplane tickets. We're taking the train. I got a great deal. I didn't want to go. Now, normally, to see my dad's parents, Nat and Irene, Grandma Irene wasn't really doing that well at the time. She only had another couple of years. Grandpa Nat, on the other hand, had another 19 years. Grandpa Nat made it to age 96. He made it to January of 2010. As of June 1991, my amazing grandpa, he was 77 going on 78. That guy he was really something. I know that's a cliche. He was old school tough, but he didn't lead with his fists or with threats in the manner of my mom's father, the mobster, Barron, who is to this day still the single scariest person that I have ever known. And it's not even close. He was always ready with the backhand and take his shoe off and hit you over the head. He was always, I'm not really exaggerating. He never hit me over the head with a shoe. My mother would have just gone fucking crazy. But normally I would have wanted to see my grandparents. My dad's parents spoiled me to no end. Even though I was a pain in the ass, they still spoiled me. I was their only grandson. And Jessica was their only granddaughter. Jess was obviously still very young at the time. She's 8, 9 years old. I wanted to stay home though. If we were not going to be flying, I didn't want to sit on a train for 21 or 22 hours? What are we going to do on the train? 1991, and here comes that word I love. It's all analog. There's no internet in 1991. We don't have smartphones. Most people didn't have cell phones, and back then the cell phones were they looked like stereos in some cases. And in that, I'm exaggerating, but only by a little bit. So I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay home and work for my dad's accounting firm. I was making, again, relatively speaking, I was making good money on days that I went in there. I was showing some industriousness despite the fact that I was, flunking most of my classes in school, as I mentioned yesterday. But I didn't want to go. Didn't want to spend 21 or 22 hours on a train, even with the proverbial pot of gold of Grandpa Nat and Grandma Irene, and 10 days with them. Mostly just palling around with Grandpa and him taking me to go-karts and bowling and bingo if I wanted to play bingo. But I didn't have a choice. I was stuck and I had to go. It turned out that the train ride was not as bad as I anticipated. We had dominoes, we had decks of cards, and we had a sleeper car. So it really wasn't that terrible. You spent one night there. And I had my little Game Boy and lots of batteries and charger, whatever the hell was the thing in 1991. So it wasn't bad. And when you look at huge chunks of what I refer to as real estate, in this case years, you can say from a broad sense that certain points in our lives are bad. They're bad. But even within the context of negative, that doesn't mean every day is terrible. And the reality is the 10 days that I spent in Fort Lauderdale, because my mom and sister spent most of their time with mom's parents. And I was so close with Grandpa Nat and Grandma Irene. I mean, Grandma Irene, before she got sick, she was like a second mom to me. What an amazing, wonderful, nurturing, again, cliche city, that she was not even a stereotypical Jewish grandmother. Irene Cohen was the prototype. Incredible cook, incredible at sewing, at needlepoint, and nothing I did was ever not amazing. Irene was magic. So even though she was limited and she was compromised, it was still great to see her. And those 10 days were fantastic. I was as negative a kid as I had allowed myself to become. I still appreciated my grandparents. I was self-aware enough to understand this is not normal. Most kids don't have this kind of relationship with their grandparents. And quite frankly, they don't have grandparents who are willing to spend the kind of money on their grandkids that Nathan Cohen did. Yeah, he liked me. He knew that I was struggling in school, but he'll figure it out. He would always tell my dad, Junior will be okay. He'll figure it out. Just give him a little time. He'll be okay. Don't worry about it. He'll be all right. Dad, he's driving me crazy. Yeah. I know. My father was like the best kid in history. Grandpa Nat almost never had to discipline him. He said the only time, and I'm gonna give a little family dirt here, the only time that Nathan Cohen ever got in the face of my dear old dad, Alan Philip Cohen, the biggest Yankee fan of all time and one of the biggest movie fans of all time. My dad was a really, really good kid. The only time Grandpa Nat said he ever got in my father's face and pointed his finger at him, like the Harrison Ford finger point of doom, was when he started getting nervous about marrying my mother. Now, I gotta be honest, Dad was punching above his weight class, if we're allowed to say that. My grandparents couldn't believe that he kind of got her. Let's just put it that way. So when he started showing signs of maybe him getting a little nervous, I don't know if she's that great of a cook. You start having conversations with people where you're like, what the fuck, man? What are we talking about here? But Grandpa Nat said I had to get right in your father's face and tell him, don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. don't make the biggest mistake of your life. Well, I was nowhere near, at age 17, anything like that. I just wanted to have some good days in Florida. And as luck would have it, there were a couple of things going on that were good. Number one, the Yankees of 1991. Now, if you look at the final tally, it looks like a down season again, because they had been horrendous. They lost 95 games in the fabled, disastrous 1990 season. And if you look at the final record in 1991, they lost 91 games. Not a good season. But there was a stretch of real estate in that Yankee season where the 1991 team went 31-20 over a 51-game stretch. So almost a third of the season, they played at a well over 90-win pace. When I was in Florida, they were on a legitimate good streak of solid baseball. They didn't really have any stars. That was the main problem. Bernie Williams was on his way, and they were about to draft Derek Jeter. They had some talented players, but the issue with that team, they just didn't have any stars. Mattingly was still in his 20s, but he was already way over the hill, unfortunately, because of his bad back. But the Yankees did great when I was in Florida. I think they went 7-3 while I was there. They swept Boston in Boston, and Boston was like in first place at the time. The Yankees went to Fenway and just kicked the shit out of them. Bob Guerin hit a grand slam to complete the sweep. It was just ridiculous. And I love Bob Guerin, great catcher, couldn't hit, but he would hit the occasional home run. He was, a good fielding catcher, and he became a Mets bench coach, and he's still in baseball. But Grandpa made sure that every day I was entertained. As if it was his responsibility to keep, as he called me, junior, even though I wasn't really a junior. He always referred to me as junior. It was his responsibility to keep me entertained. So when I got down there, now I was already a big movie fan, I should point out. I'm more than 3 years before starting coursework at New York University at this point, but I was a big movie fan. And Naked Gun 2.5 opened the day after I arrived. And I had seen the first Naked Gun. I must have watched that film 15 times. HBO and Cinemax just kept running it in an endless loop because it was PG-13. They could show it 24/7. I watched the movie over and over and over and over. So we went to see Naked Gun 2.5 my first full day, and it's okay. We had, a couple of laughs. Grandpa, the biggest laugh I've ever seen him have in theaters, because we went to movies quite often when we were together. There's a moment at the end of the film where an actress who was supposed to be Barbara Bush, Bush the first, H.W. Bush's wife, is like half naked hanging off a balcony. And when I tell you, my grandfather was laughing so hard, I thought I was going to have to stage an intervention. I don't remember him ever laughing that hard, ever, outside a movie. He just couldn't stop. He couldn't stop laughing. I didn't think it was funny. I'm not even chuckling. And that was the very end of the movie, and he's giggling away in his seat. But every day I did something. There was a place where it was like a video game and go-kart place. I think it was called Boomers. It was originally called Pizza Cabaret. It was like the sort of place where you would have kid birthday parties. But there were go-karts, there were bumper cars, and there were row after row of video games. And I was a big video game kid. You couldn't really say that I was a gamer, but I was a big video game kid. I had an old school Nintendo at home. The Sega Genesis hadn't even come out yet as of June 1991. So certain days he would take me to like a mall that had a game room, and he would give me $10. And back then, you $1/4 at a time. If you have $10 and you had some games you were good at, you might be able to play for a couple of hours. So every day was something. Some days went to the go-kart place and played video games. Other days just played video games. Then there were days where he would take me bowling. And I would shoot pool in the clubhouse where he lived. I didn't really go swimming. And sometimes we would go play bingo. He just wanted to keep me occupied. And we would always go out for dinner. We would go out for dinner, just the two of us. He would take me to nothing fancy, but he just saw it as this is what I have to do for my grandson. And when you talk about old school, during that stretch where the Yankees played so well, they had back-to-back games in Milwaukee. And this is something you can Google. I don't know the days, but this was when the Milwaukee Brewers were, they were still in the American League. It's so crazy to think that they've been in the National League since, I think, 1998. But the Yankees on I think a Friday and a Saturday, or it could have been a Saturday and a Sunday, with this not very exciting lineup. I mean, I like Mel Hall, terrible guy, as a player, and Matt Noakes and Jesse Barfield, but these were not people who should have been starting on a team that was supposed to be a contending team, as this 1991 Yankees actually pushed their record over 500 in July. They were actually 44-43 at the All-Star break, which is absolutely insane given that they started the season so poorly, and I think they were 24-34 at one point or something like that. They looked like they were on the rise, and they were, but not in the way that it seemed. But they had these two back-to-back games, not televised. I think I only saw 2 games live during that vacation. I listened on the radio. I was a big enough fan where I would listen to the games on the radio, and maybe we had other stuff that I could do at home. They had this kind of Nerf basketball, and I used to practice dunking, and just the kind of stuff that you did to keep yourself occupied if you didn't have unlimited, stuff to do on your phone, which I didn't, and I didn't have a game system there, at least not at that time. The Yankees had back-to-back games against Milwaukee where I believe they came back from 6 or more run deficits to win both games. And even if it was to be a lost season, they were giving us hope for the future, that at least the franchise was putting out a representable product. They were putting out a product that they were entertaining. They were entertaining. And so they had this big rally, this big stretch where they played really well. And it was fun. It was fun, even just listening to the games and then, catching up on the highlights on ESPN or CNN or whatever it might be. So at that time, my grandmother was she really wasn't herself. She didn't move around that well. And she had, by that point, she had Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. constant care. She really couldn't do that much by herself. She wasn't that old. I mean, she was 75. Not maybe, she was 75. 75's not that old to be completely incapacitated. Now, mentally, she seemed sharper before she took her medicine, but she was on so many different medicines that once she was kind of drugged up, she really was very, very quiet. She barely said anything, and it was just a very negative thing for somebody who I held in such high esteem. She couldn't cook anymore, and to see her again, 75. Yeah, you're up there, but 75 should not be nursing home territory. And if it hadn't been for Grandpa paying for this care, that's where she would have been. She would have been in a facility, and he just had decided he wasn't going to do that. But with all of my problems, I knew that these were moments that I needed to remember. I needed to log this into the memory bank. I needed to log the excitement of listening to a Yankee game with my grandfather in July of 1991. That this is not everybody gets to do this. You are incredibly lucky. Even with so much of my life a total dumpster fire, and it was going to get worse. I didn't know that. I assumed that, but I didn't assume what was going to happen. I just thought it was going to be for, like other stuff was going to go wrong. But towards the end of the vacation, on I think it was July 2nd, if it was the Friday. I'm not sure if the Friday was the 2nd or the 3rd. I should know this, and I don't. But the other reason why I was excited throughout that trip is whenever you turned the TV on, you saw a TV ad, a commercial of some kind for Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And in the pre-internet era, the advance buzz, remember, information still traveled very slowly, but the advance buzz on Terminator 2 was that the movie was great. there were some bits and pieces of information that were leaking out, and there was like some people reporting on Entertainment Weekly and what was it called, the E! Entertainment Channel back in the day, and NBC Insider and all of this sort of stuff. People were very high on the movie, and there was a sense that it was going to be better than the first one. And I had been looking forward to it since it was announced, and I had confidence. I was already a fan of James Cameron. I loved Aliens. I didn't see that he hadn't released the director's cut of The Abyss, but I loved Aliens. I was a big fan of the first Terminator, and I was really excited for Terminator 2. So I trusted movie critics already at age 17. I trusted that critics knew what they were talking about, and that if the general consensus from critics was that this movie is great, I'm going to like it. And I remember Grandpa subscribed to, and the magazine, the newspaper is still there. It used to be called the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel, and now I think it's just called the Sun-Sentinel. It's kind of like the Miami Herald, only it was Fort Lauderdale, but the paper still exists. And when we opened the newspaper on its opening day, the last Friday of my vacation, the Sun-Sentinel gave it 3.5 stars out of 4. Most of the critics of the day used the 4-star system, such as Siskel and Ebert did, and most of the big critics, the Daily News, Jamie Bernard, critics like that, Jack Matthews, John Anderson in Newsday, and the Sun-Sentinel critic not only gave it 3.5, he said, I almost want to give it 4. This is way better than you think it's going to be. The story is more layered, more detailed, and it must be said, the special effects are far and away the best that we have ever seen, and the best that cinema has given us to this point in history. And there were enough, like there was a critics screening that had taken place earlier in the week. So when we opened the newspaper to the to see the movie times and the kind of old school newspaper movie ads, which we still have, but it was a bigger deal in the pre-internet era. The intensity of the good reviews from Newsweek, from the Los Angeles Times, from Siskel and Ebert giving it 2 thumbs up, whatever it was, the intensity of the good reviews, I could see that Grandpa was excited because now he had a high level of confidence. This film is probably going to be great. So we went to a morning screening at the nearest movie theater to where he lived. He lived in it. It's still there. Development, it's completely different as far as, it used to be, if you'll excuse me from saying this, it was mostly retired Jewish people during that era. So we went to the movie theater closest to Cypress Chase. If you know the Fort Lauderdale and some of the kind of communities, Cypress Chase was about a mile away, a mile towards I-95 and 595. So I guess a mile further east. Not even sure what direction that would be. But Inverary. He lived very close to Inverary. It was about a mile. You could walk it in 15 minutes to the entrance to Inverary. There were about 8 or 9 different developments in there. So we went to a morning screening. And even though it was 10 in the morning, I asked Grandpa if I could get a popcorn. He said, sure. Let's do whatever. Get yourself a popcorn, Junior. That's great. You want a soda? Yeah. So we sat in our seats. It wasn't stadium seating, but I remember it was good theater. It was clean. The screen, it was a big screen, and the sound, whatever it was great. And we were riveted to our seats for the entire 2 hours and 15 minutes. And I thought the film was maybe a notch below my favorite movie of all time, which would be Chariots of Fire. I wouldn't have put it as equal to Chariots of Fire or, Robert Redford in The Natural or something like that. But this was a quarter of a notch below. And Grandpa, he couldn't believe how good the movie was. He was expecting it to be good. He saw the reviews. He had liked Terminator. He said he watched it a number of times on cable. But he was stunned because he would have taken just a mindless action movie with a lot of shit blowing up real good. He wasn't expecting a pretty deep meditation on not only what it means to be human, but on the idea of a fucking machine, a robot, coming to a point where he sees the value in human lives to a greater extent than a lot of actual humans. And from a different angle, Stanley Kubrick in 2001: A Space Odyssey gets into the same, or very, I shouldn't say same, into a similar concept. So we saw Terminator 2 on its opening day. And I remember I called my dad, we would talk on the phone, and I told him that when I get home, we got to see it. You won't believe how good this movie is. And he also had been a fan of the first one. So I saw Terminator 2 with him when I got home, and then I saw it again on my own. I just absolutely love that movie. Single best summer movie ever, Terminator 2. And if you want to put Arnold's Total Recall second, I got no problem with that, because Total Recall, there are people that will say, no, that's the best movie that Arnold Schwarzenegger ever made. It's Total Recall. Whatever. I don't quibble. And I certainly don't, this is the judgment-free zone, the judgment-free podcast here. But it was a great vacation. It was a kind of a calm seas within the midst of a very long and stormy period of my life. And I am grateful for those 10 days. I am grateful that I got to spend as much time with that quite extraordinary man, Nathan Cohen, who, as I said, made it to 96, was still living alone, was still driving, was still paying his own bills on time by check every month until a week before he died in January of 2010. So 18 and a half years later, after this vacation. And I just remember so much about that week. And I'm happy that I was able to have it, and that I did appreciate at the time. I wondered if I deserved grandparents as great as they were. And the immortal words of Clint Eastwood, deserving's got nothing to do with it. But at least I appreciated them. At least I understood how fortunate I was, even with the rest of my life having trouble making friends, the usual nonsense. But I had a blessed 10 days in Fort Lauderdale, Lauderdale Lakes, Florida, with my grandfather, a legitimately great man, came from nothing, ended up being a captain of industry, of a lesser scale, being a bowling alley proprietor and a nightclub proprietor. He came from nothing. He made something of his life. And he was very generous with his time, with his wisdom. And God, he spent so much money on me. My dad would always tell me, Dad, you don't have to buy him. No. It's okay. It's my pleasure. He's driving you crazy. He doesn't drive me crazy. He would say stuff like that all the time. But the train ride was not nearly it wasn't as arduous as I imagined. I wasn't really that bored with the stuff. And Mom, we would always play cards, and we would be screaming and yelling, and, in the train car and giggling. It wasn't bad. And the ride home went really fast. I don't know how that is, because you'd think that it would go slower because you're on your way home, and the ride home was great. There were hardly any bumps the entire way. And, I went from Penn Station. I went into the city and met my dad at his office, and I put in half a day's worth of work, and he got a kick out of that. He liked that I was, Jeremy came in. There was plenty of work for him to do. But that was probably the highlight of that year. The 10 days with Grandpa Nat and Grandma Irene, two of my favorite people ever. They're certainly in the top 5, right? But 34 years ago, today, June 29, 1991, my mom, my sister, and myself piled onto an Amtrak sleeper car for a long journey to Fort Lauderdale, and 10 days of grace for my younger self. This has been episode 574 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Sunday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then,